Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. And let me mention that everything I'm about to tell you was inspired by ancient Athens. But if I go into that, I won't get to present my talk. So maybe somebody in the question period can ask me how the certain institutions in ancient Athenian democracy controlled what we would now call, were designed to control what we would now call populism, the passions stimulated by the orators and sometimes demagogues in the assembly. But let me go on. My provocation is that really in the title of my book, oh, they left out the question mark. The most important thing about the title of my book, Can Deliberation Cure the Ills of Democracy, is the question mark, because the question mark symbolizes the fact that this is not a matter of doing the impossible, it's a matter of collective political will. Can we implement democracy in the deliberation in the thoroughgoing way that I prescribe? Now, what are the challenges, the ills of democracy that I'm going to address? There are four. How can we even assess the will of the people in a world of misinformation, disinformation, where the public will has been decomposed into filter bubbles, where people don't even have any idea what people on the other side may be advocating? They only have vilifications of that. Secondly, can we lessen extreme partisan polarization, which is creating deadlock in democracies around the world, and is actually the result of the changes in our system of political communication? Thirdly, can we create more deliberative voters, voters who actually vote based upon their thinking about the issues, assessing the pros and cons. The root of the whole idea of deliberation is weighing the competing arguments. That's the root of the very word deliberation. Critics have said that the idea of deliberative voters is a folk theory of democracy. You're about as likely to find such a voter as to find a unicorn. But I will show you that deliberation on the model of organized discussion that I have been employing since 1994 creates more deliberative voters even a year later. So we create unicorns, you might say. Now, the benefits of deliberation, the byproducts of deliberation, on my view of it, can they be spread beyond a random sample to the whole society? Can we create a more deliberative society? And I say that technology offers us a way to do that, and we have such a technology, which we are soon going to launch in at least 2 countries, which I can't name yet, but stay tuned. I want to begin with public opinion, because most people, most of the time, are not paying a lot of attention to public issues. They are rationally ignorant, as Anthony Downs argued many years ago in 1957. If I have 1 vote in millions, why should I pay a lot of attention? Because it's very difficult for my individual vote, my individual voice, to do very much. Would that it were otherwise. Secondly, many of the opinions reported in polls don't actually exist, because people never like to say they don't know. This was best dramatized by the work of my late friend George Bishop of the University of Cincinnati. Became famous for one question: do you support or oppose the Public Affairs Act of 1975? People offered answers to that, but it didn't exist. There was no Public Affairs Act of 1975. And the Washington Post celebrated the 20th anniversary of the non-existent Public Affairs Act by asking people what they thought of the repeal of the Public Affairs Act of 1975. And half the sample were told Republicans wanted to repeal it, half Democrats. And they got quite different answers, but of course you can't repeal something that doesn't exist. Now, on some issues, over time, people do develop considered opinions, or at least more than the vague impression of sound bites and headlines that we often get. But that's not enough for our democracy. The third problem is, with public opinion, is communication with the like-minded. If people do start to think about public issues, they talk to people like themselves. They consult sources that are congenial to them. And now that choice has been expanded, they can get exactly the views that they already are sympathetic to, and go through life never really seriously encountering other points of view. The public sphere has decomposed. Now, I have a method which I call deliberative polling, which we have done all over the world. You can see a list of countries there. We've done 160 of these projects. Many of them are controlled experiments. So we have a control group that doesn't deliberate, just takes the question at the time of recruitment and at the end of the process. And a deliberative process with balanced materials. We're not trying to persuade anybody. We're just trying to facilitate people coming to their own informed conclusions, which they register in confidential questionnaires, in order to protect the opinion from the social pressure of a jury verdict or the social pressure of an agreed consensus, publicly agreed consensus. No. We get confidential questionnaires, and we see in those confidential questionnaires often dramatic changes of opinion. For example, so now I'm moving from the first problem, can we assess what the people really would think about an issue, which is why I designed it, to the byproducts. One of the byproducts is lessening extreme partisan polarization. And you will see there a chart which was published in the New York Times in 2019 of the Republicans in a series of projects. The first one, America in One Room. We took 500 and some deliberators recruited by NORC at the University of Chicago, the premier social science polling organization in the United States, or one of the two anyway. And we also had a control group, but the treatment group, the deliberators, look at the Republicans, how they changed. They went from 79% on the issue of immigration, supporting sending back undocumented immigrants to their quote-unquote home countries. 79% dropped to 39%. So that's a change of 40 points. That's an earthquake in public opinion. All the other immigration proposals also changed dramatically, like support for DACA, support for low-skilled worker, visas for low-skilled workers, et cetera, et cetera. The Democrats also changed dramatically. They changed in terms of the most expensive social programs, also by as much as 40 points. That was also in the New York Times, but it was also in two articles that we published in the American Political Science Review explaining how these changes were possible. So we understand why deliberation on the organized design that we've been employing has these dramatic effects. Now, what happens later? Does it have any lasting effects? And so with that, I want to do that through the prism of the problem of how people vote. So we went back to those people a year later. This was also discussed in the New York Times and also discussed in another article that we published, peer-reviewed. The deliberators, a year later, voted according to their considered judgments on the issues. We created lots of unicorns. The control group voted almost exactly as the rest of the population. Now, before I go on to the last part, I want to mention sometimes the process of deliberative polling for a microcosm has been institutionalized. That's a picture of the Parliament building in Mongolia, which is in Ulaanbaatar. That's Genghis Khan in the statue looming over the Parliament in the back. That's this national sample recruited according to the, quote, law on deliberative polling, which exists in Mongolia, in order to change the Constitution. This is a creative way of combining the deliberations of the people with the deliberations of the elected representatives, the Parliament. This process has fostered 2 constitutional amendments that have been passed. The deliberations of the people go to the Parliament. If the Parliament approves by 2/3, it becomes a new constitutional amendment. And there's more than 700 people there recruited by the Census Bureau. And they responded with an 85% response rate. They participated. Most of the polls you see reported in the United States anyway, the political polls, have maybe an 8 or 10% response rate. That's 85%. This is a stratified random sample. It's an excellent microcosm in attitudes and demographics, and they changed dramatically, and those changes led to a constitutional amendment, most recently, to change the electoral system, adding proportional representation, because the people were very upset that they only had these 2 parties that were butting heads against each other in a highly polarized, contentious way. They wanted more choices. They implemented the electoral reform. They had an election. They got more third parties. Then they had a big celebration, a big conference about deliberative polling in Mongolia. They invited me, and I got a presidential medal, which sits on my piano. Now, the last part is, can we spread the benefits? What are the benefits of deliberation? Citizens who deliberate have a greater sense of efficacy. They keep becoming more informed. They increase mutual trust, respect for those they disagree with most strongly. They also tend to vote more at a higher rate, and they vote according to their considered judgments. If we could spread those, we could really cure the ills of democracy. So in the last part of my book, I outline all the different venues and occasions that we could do this in order to spread deliberation. And we have technology. We have at Stanford, we've developed an AI-assisted moderator. We did climate change on that with 1,000 deliberators. We got the depolarization, and we got the voting a year later in the midterms in terms of the topic of climate change as opposed to the other things in the control group that motivated deliberative voting in the midterms. So we got all the same effects, and we've also tested this against face-to-face deliberation at a big project in Finland for the parliament, where we showed that we get essentially the same results with the platform. So if we can scale the deliberative process with this platform, we can create a more deliberative society and tap into the wisdom of the public, which is ever present. Now I want to pause for questions, because I'm supposed to. Can anybody who wants to ask me a question raise a hand? There, you were first. I've thrown a lot of you at you in 10 minutes because that's the time they gave me. Well, technology sometimes doesn't work. Our platform has never failed, though, not yet. Hello. And it's been applied in 60 countries, by the way.
Hi, yeah, I'm Farah from the New York Times. I wanted to ask you, because it seems like you're bringing discussion, dialogue, and community interaction back into real life when it's been taken out of real life by the digital, the algorithms, and everything that creates these sort of siloed groups that don't know what the other side is thinking. Is that right?
Moderated interpersonal discussion on an organized design is the magic elixir that will cure the ills of democracy. It's not just exposure to messages, it's actually seeing, as you can see in that picture, actually seeing the others in your small group. When we did this in Chile during the crisis, at the end of a weekend of discussion, the Chileans were crying because they couldn't keep deliberating. Then they wanted to deliberate more, and that gave me the clue that we could recruit massive numbers to deliberate. Yes, but it's not the exposure spread by algorithms, it's the face-to-face discussion, moderated discussion with diverse others, moderated with our technology or moderated with human moderators who are carefully trained not to offer any hint of their own views. Discussion is the soul of democracy. But it's got to be on an organized design, otherwise it may just blow up. So we do a lot to ensure civility, but we do a lot to ensure diversity in the dialogue. And after a while, people learn to listen to the other, even if they start out yelling. You can see a CNN video about the immigration thing on the Stanford website, deliberation.stanford.edu, where they're yelling at each other at the beginning, and by the end, they're hugging each other. Next question, please. Yes?
Thank you for your presentation. What's preventing us from taking this at another scale and doing this for like millions of people? What do you need?
Nothing. I need the cooperation of civil society, and in some cases government. I need some funding, but the funding is modest because we have the technology. But you need to prepare the infrastructure for deliberation. The items are just common sense. Balanced materials, pros and cons, variety of proposals that are relevant, that could be implemented, advisory groups that will vet from different points of view, and once you have that infrastructure of what they're deliberating about, people take to it, and they actually love it because they never have a chance to talk to people so different from themselves. They find it very refreshing and engaging, and then they continue. So we think it could spread virally in a positive way. So we have plans to involve millions of people. We need some philanthropy. In some countries, we would need some government support or tacit support. And so we intend to do this. So this is not a pipe dream. It's entirely practical. And then there's so many venues of possible reform outlined in the last part of my book that you can see that we could actually practice what Aristotle said about the ancient Athenians, the rotation method. Each person has a chance to rule and be ruled in turn. I thought that's been dismissed as only for a small society, but with enough opportunities in different areas of life, in the schools, for ballot propositions. We've even got corporations using this to consult the public about AI or the metaverse and other such things. There's so many institutions in modern society that could use this as public input that you could have many, many opportunities to deliberate. And the amazing thing is the deliberative experience has lasting effects. Even more powerful, I would say, than the jury. The jury is also a deliberative institution, and it also has lasting effects, as my friend and sometime John Gastel showed for jury service. But this is even more impactful. So we need help. I can't do it myself, I'm just a professor, but somehow I managed to get collaborators and allies. What's the next question, please?
And unfortunately, we don't have more time, but maybe one more question. We'll take one more, and then
let's do one more
gotta close
question.
then.
Thank you for the question.
Bob Harris, co-founder of 3 decades ago of Education International, representing about 32 million educators from preschool to university through their national affiliates around the world. And so I'm struck by what you're saying in terms of civic education. I'd certainly like to carry that message to my capable and hardworking successors who now lead that organization. But the other thing I'd like to ask is, I now live in Switzerland, have for 50 years, and what I'm struck by is it sounds very much like the Swiss democratic system, which is one of the oldest systems on the earth. I wondered if you had a look at that, and if you've, it's not on the list of countries you put up there, but I think it would be very interesting to follow up.
I'm not sure I could hear the details of the question. Could you?
Yeah, so I now live in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that your concept, which is fascinating, is very much like what I've got to know in Switzerland as one of the oldest democracies on the earth. Have you looked at Switzerland?
Yeah. But most of the cantons in Switzerland do not use the oh God, what's the word? There's a Swiss word, there's a word in Switzerland for the gatherings where they have discussion. Yes, but there's only a couple of them left, and those gatherings are very large. In my view, you need small group discussion. If you're in a big crowd, I've seen some films of those gatherings, and they're so large that each person, it's more like mass society. And if you become an audience, most people, that's a variant, unfortunately, as population has grown, of audience democracy. It's not quite, it's great, but it's not as engaging as if you're in small groups of 10 or 12. And so that's what we do with the small groups in all of our projects. So we can have 1,000 or as many, we've had as many as 6,500 for a global project, and all divided into small groups. And either with human moderators or with the machine helping the small groups moderate themselves. And that cures some of the difficulties with direct democracy. As in the Athenian case, it was direct democracy in the assembly, and they had random samples before, during, and after the assembly in order to cure the passion stimulated by the orators. The Council of 500 deliberated about what the agenda was for the assembly. The Graphe Paranomen would intervene or it's like a court that could prosecute irresponsible or illegal proposals in the assembly, because there were demagogues who stimulated the Athenians to do irresponsible things, like going to war with Sparta, for example, which was a disaster. Afterwards, they added the nomothetai, which was, so if something passed in the assembly, it wasn't a law, it was a proposal, and then only became a law after deliberation with another sample of 500, which was selected by a machine, which you can visit in the Museum of the Forum, or what's left of the machine. It's a random sampling machine, and their random sampling was stratified by the tribes. So it was a very sophisticated form of a representation by random sampling. And that's why I say my entire work over the last 40 years, gee, it's hard to believe I've been doing this long, but my entire work was inspired by the ancient Athenians, but using modern social science to study it and improve it. With the platform, we get instant transcripts of all the discussions in all the small groups, and we can analyze the reasons that people support or oppose, the reasons in all the small groups. We have an LLM model that does it very quickly. So we know why people are changing their opinion, and that's why we can have impact on policy. And if you read the book, you'll find that the microcosms have impact on policy in countries all over the world, particularly on contentious issues. But if we could actually spread it, we would have even more impact and cure the ills of democracy. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.